All right, welcome. Today we're going to dig into something pretty wild, the economics of global crisis. We're going to pull back the curtain on the hidden machinery that turns chaos, things like conflict, disaster, and social upheaval, into massive, massive profit.
It's a really blunt question, right? But the answer, well, it's a lot more organized than you'd probably guess. This isn't about a few bad apples. We're talking about an entire system that's practically designed to turn instability into cash.
And that brings us to this core idea we need to understand: crisis monetization. It sounds complex, but just think of it like this. It's a built-in feature of our economy. There are specific industries that are just perfectly positioned to make guaranteed money whenever things go sideways in the world. So here's how we're going to tackle this. Think of it like we're exploring a giant iceberg. We're going to start with what you can see above the water, the obvious stuff, the most visible players, and then we'll dive deeper and deeper, all the way down to the massive, hidden financial structures holding the whole thing up.
Okay, let's start at the top. Part 1. The most direct, most obvious winners when conflict breaks out, you guessed it, the defense and weapons industry.
And the scale here, it is just mind-blowing. Get this. Based on SIPRI data, the revenue for just the top 100 global arms makers hit a record-shattering $679 billion in 2024. All the recent conflicts have totally rewritten the rules for defense spending, and it's created this absolute flood of cash for these companies.
But you might be wondering, how does that money actually move around? Well, a really key piece of the puzzle is something called a circular subsidy, and it's a fascinating idea. It basically means that when you hear about a government sending billions in military aid to another country, a lot of that money never even leaves the country it came from.
Let me walk you through it. So step 1, a government announces a huge foreign aid package. Step 2, that money, it's paid directly to domestic defense companies, think Rheinmetall or General Dynamics. Step 3, those companies use the money to build brand new weapons, but not to send abroad. They use them to restock their own government's military supplies. And then, finally, step 4, the older stuff from those now replenished stockpiles is what actually gets sent overseas as aid. See what happened? The taxpayer money just did a complete lap, ending up right back in the pockets of domestic corporations.
Okay, so this whole system just keeps building. Because conflict doesn't just create a demand for weapons, right? It throws global supply chains into chaos. And that creates huge opportunities for the energy sector.
I mean, think about it. The second a major shipping lane is threatened or new sanctions get announced, the market just freaks out. It reacts instantly. We saw a perfect example of this in early 2026. You had supply disruptions in the Middle East, and boom, crude oil prices shot right past $100 a barrel.
And you know who loves a price spike? The big 5 oil supermajors. That instability translated directly into almost unbelievable profits. Between 2022 and early 2026, those companies pulled in a combined estimated profit of, wait for it, $467 billion.
So how do they get so much out of these moments of chaos? Well, a big part of it is a clever trick called rocket and feather pricing. You've definitely seen this. When the price of crude oil shoots up, the price you pay at the pump rockets right up with it, instantly. But when the price of crude falls back down, the pump price just kind of floats down slowly like a feather. And that big gap between the rocket up and the feather down, that's pure profit for the refiners.
All right, let's go a layer deeper down the iceberg now. This is where we start to see industries that profit from the direct human fallout of these crises. We're talking about things like the scarcity of food and water and the displacement of millions of people.
And this quote, this really cuts to the core of it. When public systems break down, maybe because of climate disasters or just chronic underfunding, private companies are right there to step in. A classic example is water. They can buy up water rights for next to nothing, bottle it, and then sell it back at a huge markup, sometimes to the exact same communities whose own public water is now polluted or gone.
And you see a really similar pattern with migration. The movement of people has sparked this boom in the private border security and detention market. In the US, for instance, over 90% of immigration detention beds are run by private companies, and their business model is pretty wild. They get government contracts with these guaranteed minimums, or bed quotas, which means they get paid whether the beds are full or not. And at the exact same time, you've got tech companies like Anduril turning border surveillance into a multi-billion-dollar business.
So, what happens when the conflict ends? When the dust settles? Well, that's when the next phase kicks in. And honestly, this might be the most profitable part of the whole cycle, the reconstruction.
The amount of money we're talking about here is just astronomical. I mean, for Ukraine alone, the estimates are north of $500 billion.
And guess who's at the table designing the financial architecture for all of this? The giants. Firms like BlackRock and JP Morgan Chase.
And this slide just lays out the cycle so perfectly. On one side, you've got the part you can see. Huge multinational construction companies getting paid billions to rebuild everything. But on the other side, you have the hidden engine that makes it all possible. The nation that was destroyed has to take on enormous long-term debt to finance it all. They're basically paying foreign companies with loans that their children and grandchildren will still be paying off.
Okay, we've reached the bottom of the iceberg. This is the foundation, the deep financial plumbing that connects all of these industries that seem on the surface totally separate. Which brings us to the big question, right? Who actually owns all these companies? The defense contractors, the oil majors, the surveillance tech firms, and the giant construction companies that do the rebuilding. Is there a connection?
Well, yeah, there is. The answer, again and again, is what's known as the Big Three asset managers. Because they manage trillions of dollars in index funds and ETFs, firms like BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street often end up being the single largest shareholders across, well, pretty much every single industry we've talked about today.
This quote from the source material just nails it. What this structure does is effectively create a hedge against global stability. And here's the absolute key takeaway. When your portfolio owns a piece of every stage of a crisis, you can't lose. It doesn't matter if the money is coming from weapons, from high oil prices, or from reconstruction, because you own a piece of it all.
And that's how the wealth gets extracted. The companies on the ground make their profits from the crisis, and then they funnel that money up to their biggest shareholders, those big institutional owners, through things like dividends and stock buybacks. The cycle is complete.
So that leaves us with one last, pretty uncomfortable question to chew on. If the economic system is this good, this efficient at making money from chaos, what's the real financial incentive for peace and stability? Something to think about. Thanks so much for joining me.